requesting a sign. Because Pharaoh asked for a sign, or God was saying Pharaoh will ask for a sign. Now, is this potentially dangerous? This is in Matthew 16, verse 4. This is Jesus speaking. A wicked and adulterous generation seeketh after a sign, and there shall be no sign given, but the sign of the prophet Jonas. So, constantly, if we're in a relationship with God, is there a danger? This is open-ended. Is there a danger with constantly needing a sign, like kind of doubting Thomas, where you're just like, I don't believe it until I see it, and then Jesus comes right there and says, put your finger right here. So it's just like, is it dangerous to have that outlook of you're not going to have faith until you see something happen? Because sometimes that could be the one thing that could potentially be holding us back from having a relationship with him and having faith.
It depends on your attitude. Why are you asking for a sign? Gideon asked for a sign, and he pushed it. He asked for it twice in a different way. Now, for those folks out there who are scripturally literate, it's the fleece, right? So he asked for there to be, if I'm supposed to do this, if I'm supposed to be God's warrior, when I wake up in the morning, there'll be dew on the ground, but there won't be any dew on the fleece. So this is where we get the term laying out a fleece. I want a sign. And then, and it was the way he requested, and he took the fleece and wrung it out, and he got a whole bowl full of water out of it. It didn't make any sense. The rest of the ground was totally dry. So then he did the opposite because he wanted to make sure. See, now that kind of asking for a sign, I think that's appropriate. Well, what was his attitude? He wants to make sure I'm doing the right thing. I think that God has come and commanded me, but I don't want to trust myself. I want to make sure. So that asking for a sign, I think, is that God appreciates it because it's a relationship. He's asking for something from God. God gives it to him for what? Encouragement. So, and what is it talking about with Jesus? What were the signs for? They were to indicate who he was. And it was necessary to show people. A person that can command the weather and it obeys him. A person that commands demons and they obey him. A person that produces food apparently out of thin air. Either they're, Penn and Teller, or they're who they say they are, which is the real question. So in that sense, asking for a sign is not. But Jesus condemned the Pharisees for asking for a sign. He said, you're an adulterous generation. You're always looking for proof. So if I'm expecting God to prove himself to me, that puts me in the condition of judging God. That's a wrong attitude. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's big.
And I think there's other parts of the New Testament where the Pharisees come to Jesus and they ask him questions. They're trying to trap him. Here they're trying to, okay, now prove yourself to me. Right. They're not sincere to really, are they wondering, are you really the Son of God? Right. I think in that case, that's why Jesus was doing many miracles. He was healing people. He was casting demons out. He was feeding the 5,000 with a couple of loaves. So he showed himself to be the Son of God. He was doing miracles to show himself, and because he had compassion on the people. But what he didn't like is someone coming to him, the Pharisees there, saying, prove yourself to me. And Jesus said, I'm not going to. He said, the only evidence you're going to have is Jonah, which is the 3 days that Jonah was in the belly of the fish and came out. Jesus is 3 days in the tomb before he rose from the dead. So that was the only sign that they're going to have, because they weren't sincere in their. I think it's a good thing for us to go to God and say, show yourself to me. To ask him to show him something in your life. I think that's the okay way to come to, and I think God does want to show himself to us, and he will if we sincerely are seeking him.
Is that a healthy thing to challenge God, do you think?
That's not challenging God. Yeah. See, it depends. If we just think in terms of the attitude, if I recognize who I am, as God gives me grace to recognize that I am infinitesimally small, but in my own mind, I'm big. See, I'm the most important person in the world in my own mind. Yeah. You see, so our whole judgment is skewed. It's all around like, I'm number one and everything else is less than that. And so if we turn that around and say, no, wait a minute, everything comes from God and returns to God. He's the Alpha and Omega. It's all him expressing himself, and I'm just a tiny part of that expression. And you start to get the wonder of who the person of God is. Now your heart attitude is different. And now it's like Jesus said, ask whatever you wish, in my name. In other words, with my attitude, and you'll receive it. So to me, that's a wonderful challenge. It's like, well, do I have that attitude? Maybe not. Lord, show me where I, so it's more about where's my heart. And the Lord is so gracious to show us where our heart is. A lot of times if our heart is ugly, I think it's natural for us to not want to see that. And we also know that, well, the scriptural testimony is the human heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Now, see, people who are humanists don't like to hear that.
Right.
Because, people are essentially good. No, I would say people are essentially children of God in the sense that he brought all of us into existence. But people are not naturally good. You can see any infant, child expresses, the whole range of the human condition. Isn't that right?
So I have a question for you. For both, is what happens in the spiritual realm connected with what happens here?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So you're saying that something that happens in heaven affects what happens here, and there's interconnection going on here. It's not just that's there and this is here. There is a connection.
I
between
totally
the two.
agree with that.
Okay, because I have a verse here, and it's really interesting, and I was just flipping through it. It's about Jesus saying something to Peter. This is Matthew 16, 13. I know I kind of came to this quickly, so it's Matthew 16, 13. When Jesus came into the coast of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Whom do men say that I, the Son of Man, who am I?" And they said, "Some say that you are John the Baptist, some Elias, others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." He says unto them, "But whom do you say that I am?" And Simon Peter answered and said, "Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus answered and said unto him, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed it to you, but my Father which is in heaven. And I say unto you that thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. And I will give unto you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatsoever thou shalt bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatsoever thou shalt loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven." Then he charged his disciples that they should tell no man that he was Jesus the Christ. What does that have to say about Jesus saying, you have the keys to the kingdom, and if you ask something in my name, it will be done? And he's kind of giving his disciples, he's giving his believers this power that I think these other spiritualities are trying to tap into. Real power. You want to talk about real power? He is giving them the keys to having the whole kingdom at their fingertips for Christ, for the kingdom, for goodness. I mean, it's an amazing concept. It's just
Well, there's a lot in there, and you touched on the one thing. Of course, we have to recognize that this passage is one that the Roman Church uses to justify the idea of a pope. And they say that Peter was the first pope, and it was passed down, like a heritage from the time of Peter. And I'm not arguing with that. I'm just saying that may not be what this says.
Right.
That's just one interpretation. And other people will argue other things, and I don't want to get into the theological idea arguments. What is the Lord trying to tell us through this? The main thing I got out of this is the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. And I think the thing we need to understand about that is gates are designed to keep things in and to keep things out, right? So it's like I was talking about this in the Bible study this morning. The gates of hell shall not prevail against the kingdom. That means the kingdom, to me, is assaulting the gates of hell. This world belongs to God. And no fortress is going to keep God out, right? There's a desperate struggle to keep God out, but his spirit will break through and is breaking through right now throughout the world. And what is the kingdom? The kingdom is the place where God is ruling. And we can look around us now and we can see that it doesn't seem like, if God is good, that he's ruling here. He is, but it's all, we get so confused because there's the temporary and the eternal, and we get our wires crossed when we're talking about this stuff. So when we look at a passage like this, what it points out is there is, as you said, Ryan, a connection between heaven, in other words, the spiritual realm, and earth. And I can't say that I know what it means when he says, I will give you, Peter, the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. I don't know what that means.
Now, he's talking about, this is just a question, is he talking about Peter specifically, or is he talking about the people that believe in him, that they will have that power? It's just...
I think he is talking about anybody who, he starts out saying, flesh and blood has not revealed this to you. In other words, you didn't figure this out by yourself, and you didn't learn it from somebody else. God himself revealed it to you. So that's the foundation of everything. And if you want to know the truth, which is the main thing that was driving me in my spiritual search, is I wanted to know what was true. And I wanted to know what was true so much that I didn't care if it destroyed me, or it tortured me, or it blessed me. I didn't care, because the most important thing was the truth. And I think anybody who brings that attitude into their search for spirituality, is God is going to lead them to himself, because, as it's clearly stated, Jesus said, I am the truth. The Holy Spirit is called the Spirit of Truth. It's all about truth. Another word for truth would be reality. God is reality. He's not fantasy, as you said before, right, John. He's not a fantasy. Right. And we have it backwards. It's like God is someplace else, and he's not really involved in this stuff. And what you're pointing out is, oh yes, he is. He's intimately, absolutely involved in everything that goes on in our lives.